There is some chaos going on in college football. And I'm not even talking about the news that came down that we mentioned briefly at the end of our show yesterday, that being at SEC Media Days that the University of Texas and Oklahoma University are potentially or allegedly, whatever word you want to throw in before, looking to leave the Big 12 and go to the SEC. Now, we know that college football is in a transformative state. It's been said many, many times over the last few months. This is the most transformative moment in the history of college football. Now, we could go back to the inception of college football and how important it was and what the NCAA meant and how the game became as popularized as it did when it first got put on television. All of those things, all of those moments were important because it leads to where we are now. But as far as reconfiguring what's important in college football, right now is the greatest time. And here are just a few of the things that are going on. We talked a couple of days ago about the Supreme Court case that basically said that scholarships weren't the top of the monies that could be given to student athletes. So if there were educational monies that could be distributed, whether that's a performance-based a reward, so getting on the dean's list or some sort of additional monies for being academically excellent, you can be paid that. You can do paid internships now. So let's say you're down at the University of Texas and some oil company wants to hire the starting quarterback to be a paid intern in the summer. He can now do that. Before, you couldn't do all those things. Just think about how that changes how kids are going to think about going to school. Name, image, and likeness we have detailed significantly over the last month, maybe even going back over the last year, because we knew that it was happening and became real on July 1st. Nick Saban talking about Bryce Young making almost $1 million. NIL is transforming how student athletes are looking at their college experience. And it's not just the major sports. We see it in women's basketball and lacrosse. These kids can do camps now and be paid for them. It's changing. The transfer portal. Right? We haven't talked a lot about the transfer portal in college football. We talk a lot about it in college basketball because we see that. Like, it feels more real when a star from one school leaves and goes to another school. And, over the previous years, it was they got the exemption right away. Now, there really isn't a need for an exemption. You can go into the transfer portal once at any time and go wherever you want to go. But in college football right now, I don't know if people know this, there's about 1,100 kids. 1,100 kids. Camps start like next week or 2 weeks from now, maybe sooner than that for some of these places. Camps start in a week and a half. There's 1,100 kids that have nowhere to go. They're just sitting there in a transfer portal, probably rethinking their decision to leave the school that gave them a scholarship originally. That's chaos that's happening around the college sports. We talked about this yesterday. The diminishing clout of the NCAA. Right? There's kind of no governing body, even though the Division I, II, and III councils, they'll handle a lot of those things going on. But the NCAA's power has waned. And what does that mean for college sports? And then we get the report that came out yesterday that I just mentioned, that Texas and Oklahoma are looking to leave the Big 12 for the SEC. And it just throws my mind back to the early 2000s, or late 2010s, I should say, early 2000s, which would be 2010 and 2011, when all of this movement was taking place with schools leaving one conference, others, threatening to leave another. The University of Texas at that time, if we all remember, was threatening to bring Oklahoma and 4 other schools to go out to the Pac-10 and make it the Pac-16. It was chaos, right? Nebraska ends up leaving and going to leaving the Big 12 also and going to the Big 10. There's now the Big 14, even though it's still called the Big 10. There's 14 teams in there. Like, all of that realignment, it was crazy. You didn't know who was going where and who was going to be anyone's rival anymore. And all of this history of teams playing each other over decades, eons really, of college sports history was just thrown out the window. Well, you ask now, why now for Texas or for Oklahoma? Why would you do this now? right? You got a new head coach and Steve Sarkisian down at Texas. Hell, Lincoln Riley wins every Big 12 championship every single year. He puts out quarterbacks as first-round draft picks almost on the reg. And so why would Oklahoma want to leave? And the answer is always simple when you lack an answer for something like this. It's money. And it always comes down to money in college sports. Now, the Big 12 is responsible for this themselves because they're not even the Big 12. There's only 10 teams. And they had an opportunity a couple of years ago, maybe even last year it was, we were talking about expanding, or maybe it was a couple of years ago. I don't think it was last year, expanding the Big 12 so that they could become more like the other Power 5 conferences. That is, having at least 12, some of them up to 14 teams, which makes it attractive for a lot of reasons. One, because the television rights deal that comes your way, it looks better when there's more teams that you can potentially compete against or that could potentially rise. And I think it helps you when you have a robust conference schedule when you're talking about the college football playoff. Well, the Big 12 decided not to do it. I mean, they looked at Cincinnati, they looked at Houston, they looked at some of these other a group of 5 schools, and they ultimately decided against expanding. And as a result, teams that feel like they're on the come, like Oklahoma, like Texas potentially with their new head coach and Steve Sarkisian, are looking at the landscape, the money that potentially is surrounding the Big 12, and they're saying, this isn't going to look good for us. This is not going to go the way that the SEC is going. It is not going to go the way that the Big Ten is going, which makes almost $750 million a year in TV rights. And so Texas and Oklahoma, knowing that they're big-time schools, they start thinking, well, we got to go where the money is. And the money is in the SEC. Just as a point of comparison, the Big 12 TV rights deal ends in 2025. It is with ESPN and it is with Fox. The renegotiation, like the early, they always early renegotiate, it's not really going anywhere. And they believe that number is going to be minuscule compared to what the SEC is getting, which will also be on ESPN starting in 2024, which is $300 million. And so Texas and Oklahoma, they have no choice being bigger branded programs than to leave the sinking ship that is the Big 12, created by itself. They poked their own holes in that ship, created this own problem. Texas and Oklahoma, they have no choice but to want to leave. Now, will it happen? That's another question. And we remember this when this was going on, a decade or so ago. It was all innuendo. It was all reports and insider information and anonymous sources. And you just never know what to believe. But is it a smart play for Texas and Oklahoma? Hell yeah, it is. But here's the other thing. The SEC's got to want them. I wonder if the SEC will want them. Bro, be careful what you ask for. Texas can't win 9 games in a depleted Big 12. They're going to get their asses kicked in the SEC. But the reality is, and Jimbo kind of took the high road there, the reality is he doesn't want Texas in the SEC. They're priding themselves on being the only team from Texas in the SEC, the greatest conference in college football. And why does that help them? Because they can recruit the heck out of Texas and say, we are in the SEC. You want to go to the NFL? Come play at Texas A&M in the SEC. If Texas now gets in the SEC and that rivalry comes back, that'll be cool. And I guess in a sense for those who care about Texas rivalries. But Texas will now say, we have the bigger brand. Hook 'em horns, right? We have the bigger brand. And you'll also go into the NFL, and our program has a head coach who won a national championship, and Steve Sarkisian. They all of a sudden usurp Texas A&M as the go-to program in the state of Texas because of the brand of the Texas Longhorn relative to the brand of Texas A&M. Now, Texas A&M did really well in the SEC. Remember their first year? That was Johnny Manziel, won the Heisman Trophy, beat Alabama. They went 11-2 that season. They were really damn good. But then they kind of fell on some hard times, and eventually they moved on from their head coach, and Jimbo Fisher took this job because he knew how big it is, how important it is to be in the SEC. When you're one of the I think most storied at one of the most storied franchises in the ACC at Florida State, and you bounce to go to Texas A&M. The only reason you're doing that is because it's in the SEC. He knows how important the SEC is. And while he maybe can say all the right things and say, yeah, it'll be good for the rivalry, he doesn't want Texas in the SEC, because if Texas comes in the SEC, then Texas A&M is less powerful in the state of Texas in recruiting. And right now, we know what the facts are. 11 of the 14 teams in the SEC have to say yes. We already know 2 are saying no. Texas A&M, I should say, and Missouri. They're former colleagues in the Big 12. You know that they're saying no. The question will be, can they convince one of these other universities, and this is much higher than the head coach of these football teams or basketball teams and the athletic director. This is on a board of regents level and a presidential level. Can they convince one of these other teams to keep Texas out? It'll be interesting to follow this, because it's going to get dicey. I remember when this happened a decade ago. We all remember it. It was chaotic. And we ended up having teams that just feel like they don't fit, like Maryland and Rutgers in the Big Ten. What is that? What? Okay, whatever. That seems to be coming again. It's kind of balancing act right now. But it sounds like anarchy might be right around the corner.